So let's think about that paradigm of knowing just a little bit before we move on into something new. If knowing is thought, if the root metaphor is perception, then the tendency is to think ontologically in terms of being, things existing, as being distinct from time. Being and time are distinct. Something has being if it persists in time. We think of motion as something that has its own being but happens to be in motion. What it is isn't defined by the fact that it's in motion sometimes and not other times. So there's the ontology based on the idea of objects with qualities that can persist in time. The way we study them comes from postulating a universal observer position, a subject position any possible subject in principle could take, and agree with whatever knowledge claims you make. It's actually a universal observer position and instrumental actor position, because modern physics has come down to definitions that increasingly are operationalized so that the definition of a concept becomes the measurement process that you use to get your measurement. And that involves instrumental actions, interventions in the world. And these are specified by very strict rules called operational definitions that are very tightly and explicitly worked out so that any other person could replicate what's being done. And then the claim is, if I'm saying that my model is true, that has validity, then anybody could repeat what I've done, follow exactly what I did, and get the same results. So operationalized definitions are an essential feature of this form of acquiring knowledge. Validity. When is knowledge valid and when is it not? Well, when we're pursuing knowledge this way with model making, validity is based on accurate prediction. So our model is accurate, it has validity insofar as we can make predictions from it, test those out, and if the predictions come true, that supports the validity. I think those are the main points I want to cover on the characteristics of mainstream research based on perception, thinking of knowledge as perception. When we look at what qualitative researchers do, however, the situation is rather different, because we're not, when we're doing our qualitative research, we're trying to understand people. And so meaning is very important to us, understanding meaning. And meaning, what kind of answer could you give to the question, what's the ontological status of meaning? In what sense does meaning exist? What can we say about that? Well, I'm sure you can think of some very reasonable things to say, but it gets a little harder if we say, well, meaning is always expressed with human beings within a cultural context. Meaning depends on culture, and expressions that are meaningful reproduce, contribute to culture. What's the ontological status of culture? In what way can we say a culture exists? What is that all about? Well, that's a very difficult philosophical question, not an easy one. And answers that are most compelling seem to be mainly partial. Anthony Giddens, for example, the British social theorist, he talks about structure as the medium and the outcome of action. And we can translate that over to culture is the medium of action. You have to have it to act. But it's also the outcome, because every act you do claims cultural themes in slightly different ways, slightly new ways. Culture iterates, it changes as a result of action. And that's kind of a helpful formula. It's not real different from Hegel's concept of Geist or spirit, which is, Hegel's conception is difficult, and it involves an understanding of dialectics. And I'm going to get to Hegel in a little while, so I won't try to say any more about that now. Okay. Anyway, qualitative researchers don't really study qualities. We're interested in meaning, we're interested in culture, we're interested in the kinds of human identities that are made possible in cultures. We're interested in things that are neither subjective nor objective. They're not objective because they're not open to sensory access. They're not subjective because they don't persist in one person's mind. That doesn't really work to say it's the collection of what's in everyone's mind somehow is what we mean by culture. And there's another reason why it's ontologically tricky, which is that culture is something that's fundamentally implicit when we're talking about lived culture. Understanding how to act with people, that's culture. Understanding how to talk. Understanding very subtle things about what's considered right, wrong, proper, very subtle things. That any articulation of them is an interpretation. If you talk to people about the culture that they live in, they can talk to you, but they're interpreting as well. They're not describing to you, they're interpreting. And so the researchers interpreting, people we work with are interpreting. The object of study, when it's culture, is inherently, unavoidably implicit. Can't be made explicit. So ontologically, what does that mean? That's another kind of a tricky question.